All right, so as you guys already know, my favorite DAC that I spent time with is the DAC from Holo Audio. Setting that to the side, Holo Audio has recently announced the Spring 3, and one question that has been coming up is how it stacks up against the DAC. Even more, there is an equal interest in the now discontinued Spring 2, as picking one up on the used market might not be a bad idea for those who can't afford the Spring 3 or the DAC. So yeah. Which Holo Audio DAC should be in your shopping cart and why? And with a warm welcome back to New Record Day, that's exactly what we're going to find out. Before we get started, the Spring 2 DAC that I'm using in this evaluation is not mine, and nor was it sent by Holo Audio. This was actually sent in by one of our subscribers here, and I have had this far too long. I just wanted to publicly say thank you for the insane patience and kindness given by this particular viewer. And also, I'll be sending a little something back with the DAC as a sincere token of my appreciation. You know who you are, and once again, thanks, man. I really do appreciate it. All right, I'm gonna try to be as brief and to the point as I can, so let's get rolling. Let me begin by saying, the differences between the DAC and the Spring 3 is very subtle. The Spring 2 is a little different beast, so let's save that guy for last and do a comparison between the May and the Spring 3 first. Also, if you haven't seen Golden Sound's video breakdown of all of these DACs and all of his observations, I'll leave a link down below, and it's surely worth checking out. It's a great video. For those who have seen it, and if you are wondering if I'll be saying anything much different from him, I'm going to save you the time right now and tell you I think we are hearing 99% of the same things between these DACs with a couple small differences. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive in and chat about the differences between the Holo Audio DAC, Spring 3, and Spring 2 DAC. Being brief about this, the only visible difference between all of these DACs, when you're looking at them, when we're talking about the older Spring 2 versus the newer May and Spring 3, is the copper buttons. This is a lot harder than I thought. Where am I? Oh boy. All right. Are the buttons. You can clearly see that on the Spring 2, this anodized copper is lighter than the copper used on the DAC and the Spring 3. It's a lighter shade of copper versus the newer brothers. Also, when the units are on, the LCD screen is brighter on the DAC and on the Spring 3, and I think it's much easier to read. Outside of this, they all look pretty much the same, and come with remotes that all look the same as well. On the business end, the input and outputs are all laid out the same, and they pretty much look identical for the most part outside of a different USB connection used on the older Spring 2. All right, so I promised, brief. Let's go ahead and move on to the good stuff. The key differences between the Spring 3 and the DAC is I do think that the DAC offers a little more detail, and when I say a little, I'm talking about a whopping %. I noticed as I have gone back and forth between the two that most of the air, extension, and information in the time domain does seem to stand out just a little bit more with the DAC over the Spring 3, but I should mention these differences don't show up from song to song each time and only on specific tracks that are truly reference level. What's interesting to me is when this subtle difference does show up, it does two things for me that are worth noting and mentioning. Number one, obviously, it does seem that the DAC could be the more detailed of the two DACs. That's obvious, right? But the other thing that I notice is where things get interesting. I feel like that last bit of detail, what's most interesting is where the detail resides and where it lives in the recordings. As I've gone back and forth more times than I can count, what I keep coming back to is the word scale. There is a sense of scale. The DAC, especially with time domain information, air, extension, and so on, sounds larger to me. It's almost as if every large space that I'm able to clearly render in my mind as I listen gets a little larger. Every single reverb trail seems to last a little longer. Every single tambourine hit seems to light up the space a little more. So yeah, that 1%, while small, is going to be one of those things that when a lot of audiophiles hear it, they can't live without it. They want it. And for me, it would be the one thing that I gotta say I really appreciate about the DAC's performance. It's stunning. So one of the things that Golden Sound mentioned was that the bass was a little bit more robust with the DAC over the Spring 3. And for me, this was a challenge to agree with. I have gone back and forth listening to bass-heavy tracks and tried to determine if indeed the DAC hits a little harder. While I never felt like I could totally agree with Golden Ear's findings, the dedication to focusing on the bass did lead to some equally interesting discoveries, and that's why we're talking about it. When we talk about details in our systems, we often think and talk about all things on top, just like we did in the time domain impressions. With that being said, we don't really spend much time talking about bass detail and what that can sound like. As I played a lot of well-recorded tracks of just upright bass, while I didn't necessarily hear more bass, I heard slightly more detailed and revealing bass. In other words, when the cavity of the upright wakes up and crafts the note that we eventually hear, there is a lot of resonances and complex things happening all at once, and capturing every little detail did seem to be easier with the DAC. So yeah, while I didn't necessarily hear more bass, what I heard subjectively is better bass, and that can't be a bad thing any way you slice it. That's it. Believe it or not, when it comes to listening impressions, folks, that is it. Nothing more. Nothing in the mid-range, nothing else at all I'm going to elaborate on because it's just too dang close, and I don't want to commit to a big giant word salad that is just a bunch of silly nonsense, you know? So those are the listening impressions and the differences between the DAC and the Spring 3. Now, with all that being said, there is one thing that is going to push many audiophiles in the direction of the newer Spring 3 over the May, and they will be willing to ditch that last 1% altogether that I was just rambling about. As some of you already know, the Spring 3 has one serious ace up its sleeve, and that is, folks, a discrete preamplifier gain stage built right into the DAC. With the Spring 3, you are getting a scaled-down version of the Strain preamplifier dropped right inside the Spring 3. What this means and what it does is it opens up the door to using this DAC as your entire front end as long as you don't need analog inputs for other goodies. Since so many audiophiles are using digital-only rigs, this makes the Spring 3 very compelling and interesting to say the least. So what about the Spring 2? I mean, these can now be picked up, used for far less than both the May and the Spring 3. And it begs the question, what would you be giving up if you decided to spring for the Spring 2? You see what I did there? I got dad jokes all day. I'll just keep them rolling. You're here. You're watching, I'll keep them rolling. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, the Spring 2 does sound like a different animal to me. While it is still able to deliver goods in the detail department and put the digital puzzle back together, it sounds softer than the May and the Spring 3. Being careful with my words, I can't say that it's necessarily a smoother sounding DAC than the others, but indeed, it sounds softer, which does mean I need to clarify what the heck that actually means. On many tracks where something plays that is often edgy, something like, I don't know, a distorted electric guitar, none of these DACs sound harsh at all. The guitar has presence and it sounds as aggressive as it should, but nothing ever leads to listening fatigue. They all sound smooth. The difference with the Spring 2 is it almost sounds like the guitar is just a little less present than the others. It is still a phenomenal sounding DAC, so I don't want you to think that what I'm saying is a negative thing. If anything, I think that it could be the right DAC for a lot of systems where you're just being smart about how you build out the rest of your system. So, as an example, if you have plenty of presence, plenty of spark, maybe a little bit too much, and you're willing to let some of that go, then I would say that the Spring 2 on the used market would be a Phenomenal and intelligent choice. No doubt about that. And folks, we are done here. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown, and I'll see you crazy DAC loving knuckleheads in the next video.